hospital corridor echoed with the sound of Rebecca's hurried steps as she headed for another night shift in the intensive care unit. Her brown hair was carefully tied in a discreet bun, and her immaculate white uniform reflected the same dedication she demonstrated in every aspect of her work. As she walked, her thoughts alternated between the responsibilities that awaited her and the image of Sophia, her 9-year-old daughter, whom she had left sleeping at home under Caroline's care. Rebecca smiled as she remembered how the little girl had insisted on wearing the miniature lab coat she had received as a gift on her last birthday, declaring with conviction that one day she would be a nurse as brave as her mother and father. "Mommy, Daddy saved soldiers, and you save everyone. I want to be just like you too," Sophia had said that morning, her eyes shining with admiration and determination. The memories of William still caused a deep ache in Rebecca's chest, even 4 years after his passing. Her decorated military nurse husband had given his life to save a medical team during an attack on the field hospital where he served. Rebecca still kept the Medal of Honor she had received in his memory, along with the last photo they had taken together when Sophia was only 5 years old. The loss of William had been devastating, but it had also further strengthened her commitment to nursing and her desire to honor the legacy of courage and dedication he had left behind. "You have his heart," her colleagues would often say, watching how Rebecca treated each patient with the same determination and compassion that characterized William's work. The night shift unfolded with the familiar routine of checking vital signs, administering medications, and closely monitoring the most critical patients. Rebecca moved between the beds with the efficiency that her 15 years of experience had given her, but she never failed to dedicate a few extra moments to comfort those who were awake and apprehensive. In one of the rooms, an elderly lady held her hand and whispered that she had the hands of an angel, to which Rebecca responded with a gentle smile. "You remind me a lot of my daughter, always saying we have superpowers. In reality, our greatest power is simply being here, present when someone needs help." At dawn, as she organized the last notes in her medical records, Rebecca received a message from Sophia. It was a photo of the girl already dressed for school, holding a drawing where she had portrayed her family, herself wearing a small lab coat, Rebecca in her nurse's uniform, and William, drawn from the photo they kept in the living room, wearing his military uniform. Below the drawing, Sophia had written in her neat handwriting, "My family of heroes." Rebecca felt her eyes well up as she responded to the message, promising that she would be home in time to prepare Sophia's favorite breakfast. It was during these moments that she felt most strongly the weight and honor of being not only a nurse, but also the guardian of William's legacy and the mentor of Sophia's courageous dreams. The morning sunlight was beginning to stream through the hospital windows when Rebecca finally ended her shift. As she changed clothes in the locker room, she thought about how her life had transformed into something much greater than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just about caring for patients or raising a daughter alone. It was about keeping alive a story of love, courage, and dedication that had begun with William and now continued through her and Sophia. "You would be so proud of her," Rebecca murmured to herself, touching the wedding ring she still wore. "Our little one has your same adventurous spirit and brave heart." With these words, she picked up her bag and headed home where Sophia was waiting, eager to share another day of dreams and stories about following in the heroic footsteps of her parents. The next day, Sophia swung her legs restlessly on the chair in the hospital corridor, waiting to be called for her routine exam. Her mother was busy on another floor caring for patients, and the girl felt proud to be old enough to go to the lab alone. Wearing her favorite superhero t-shirt and holding her school backpack on her lap, she observed the movement of the hospital, imagining herself one day wearing a white coat like her mother. The corridor was quiet that afternoon, with only a few nurses rushing by and the distant sound of machines from the nearby rooms. It was then that a noise caught her attention. Dr. Carter's office door was ajar, and his raised voice echoed through the empty hallway. Sophia's heart raced as the words reached her ears. The hospital director was speaking on the phone, his normally controlled voice now trembling with nervousness. "It's done. The machines were unplugged exactly as we agreed. No one will find out. I've already prepared everything to make it look like it was the night shift nurse, Rebecca. She's perfect to take the blame. She works alone and has access to all the equipment." Sophia felt her entire body freeze, recognizing her mother's name in that frightening conversation. Her small hands gripped the strap of her backpack tightly as she continued listening, now paralyzed with fear. The director's voice continued, growing lower and more threatening. The police will find her fingerprints on the equipment. I'm sure they'll believe it. After all, who would suspect the respected hospital director? The widowed nurse is a much more convincing suspect. The tears began to blur Sophia's vision when she understood the gravity of the situation. Dr. Carter was planning to accuse her mother of a crime he had committed himself. The girl could feel her heart beating so hard that she was afraid the sound would give her away. The principal continued his phone conversation, now discussing details about money and something about the mafia, words that made Sophia's stomach churn with dread. The payment was generous, as promised. Now we just need to wait for the investigation to begin. I've already planted the necessary evidence, and in a few hours the police will be here. Rebecca won't be able to defend herself. All the evidence will point to her. With trembling legs and accelerated breathing, Sophia knew she needed to get out of there before she was discovered. Her mind was spinning with confused and frightening thoughts. Her mother was in danger, and she was the only one who knew the truth. Gathering all the courage she could muster, the same courage her father used to say ran in the family's veins, Sophia silently rose from the chair. The sound of the principal's voice still echoed down the hallway. "Don't worry. No one will find out. By now the body must already be taken away, and soon Rebecca will be handcuffed. It will all look like a simple case of medical negligence." Sophia began to slowly move away, her sneakers making the least possible noise against the hospital floor. Her heart was beating so loudly that she was certain it could be heard throughout the hallway. The words she had just overheard replayed in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She needed to find help. She needed to save her mother, but who would believe a 9-year-old child? Tears now flowed freely down her face as she moved further and further away from the office, carrying the weight of a terrible secret and the responsibility of protecting the only person she loved most in the world. The routine exam completely forgotten, Sophia had only one thought in mind. She needed to find someone who could help her mother before it was too late. The moment Dr. Carter realized Sophia's presence was marked by the almost imperceptible sound of a muffled sob coming from the hallway. His eyes widened as he recognized Rebecca's daughter, sitting in the chair near the door of his office, and a wave of panic took over his body. Through the reflection of the window glass, he could see the girl's tear-stained face and the terror stamped in her eyes. The phone slipped from his trembling hands as he quickly headed towards the door, but Sophia had already stood up and began running down the hallway. "Hey girl, come back here immediately!" His voice echoed through the hospital walls, causing some patients and staff to turn and observe the scene. Sophia ran desperately through the hospital corridors, her small body dodging between doctors, nurses, and visitors. Her sneakers made a rhythmic noise against the floor, mixing with her panting breath and the sound of her accelerated heartbeat. Behind her, she could hear Dr. Carter's voice getting farther and farther away as he tried to maintain appearances in front of the other staff. "Come back here. We need to finish your exam. Someone stop that girl." Sophia knew she couldn't stop. She couldn't let him catch her. Her legs were trembling, but fear propelled her forward, while her mind screamed a single thought. She needed to find her mother before it was too late. Fate showed its cruelest face on that gloomy afternoon. While Mariana desperately searched for Renata in the hospital corridors, a devastating scene began to unfold on the 3rd floor. 2 police officers approached with heavy steps towards Renata, who was focused on taking notes in a patient's medical record. The sound of their boots against the floor made her look up, meeting the officers' grave expressions. "Mrs. Renata, you are under arrest for the death of patient Alberto Mendez. He was in a coma. We have evidence that you purposefully disconnected the machines keeping him alive during your night shift." The officer's words echoed through the hallway like thunderclaps as other nurses and doctors stopped to watch, shocked. Renata dropped the clipboard, the sound of impact reverberating in the sudden silence that ensued. "No, that's impossible. I would never do that. I've been a nurse for 15 years. I've saved hundreds of lives. You're making a terrible mistake." Her voice trembled with despair as the cold handcuffs wrapped around her wrists, the icy metal contrasting with the warmth of her tears. The moment mother and daughter finally met tore the hearts of all present. Sophia came running to the 3rd floor, her small lungs burning from the effort, only to see her mother being dragged away by the police officers. "Mom, let her go. My mom would never hurt anyone. Please, don't take her." Sophia's desperate cries echoed through the walls, making Rebecca struggle against the handcuffs. "Sophia, my love, Mommy is innocent. I didn't do this. You know I would never hurt anyone. Caroline will take care of you until I come back. Be strong like your father," Rebecca shouted between sobs, trying to break free to reach her daughter. One of the officers held her arm tighter, leading her towards the elevator. "Ma'am, don't make your situation worse. We have witnesses and conclusive evidence of the crime." Sophia ran towards her mother, but was restrained by a nurse who hugged her, preventing her from following. "You can't take her. Dr. Carter, he... Sophia began to scream, but her voice was interrupted by the hospital director himself, who arrived panting at the scene. Dr. Carter emerged with his imposing presence, adjusting his lab coat and assuming a false expression of compassion before the scene. What a sad situation, such a dedicated professional. "I never imagined something like this could happen in our hospital," he declared in a mournful voice, but his eyes, as they met Sophia's, conveyed a silent threat that made the girl choke on the words she wanted to say. Rebecca was pushed into the elevator, her last words echoing through the hallway. "Sophia, Mummy loves you. Everything will be okay, I promise." The doors closed, taking Rebecca away from her daughter, while Sophia collapsed in tears in the nurse's arms, her small body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. Dr. Carter's discreet smile on his lips went unnoticed by everyone except the girl, who now carried the weight of a truth that no one else knew. Sophia ran through the hospital corridors as if her life depended on it, her tears blurring her vision as she desperately searched for Caroline. Her little heart was beating so hard that it seemed like it wanted to escape from her chest, and her hands were trembling so much that she could barely hold the backpack she was still carrying. The staff and patients who crossed her path became mere blurs in her peripheral vision, while her mind kept repeating her mother's last words, asking her to find Caroline. The fear that Dr. Carter might be following her made every shadow seem threatening, every noise startling her, turning the hospital, which had always been her second home, into a frightening labyrinth. After what seemed like an eternity, Sophia finally caught sight of Caroline coming out of one of the rooms in the pediatric wing. The nurse, who always had a warm smile on her face, immediately realized that something was terribly wrong when she saw the state of the girl. "Aunt Caroline," Sophia shouted with a choked voice, running towards her and throwing herself into her arms with such force that she almost knocked them over. Caroline felt her uniform starting to get wet with the girl's tears as she hugged her protectively, quickly leading her to a small empty break room. "Sophia, my angel, take a deep breath. What happened? Why are you like this? Where's your mom?" And the questions poured out quickly as she closed the door and knelt in front of her best friend's daughter, holding her icy hands between her own. The words started to tumble out of Sophia's mouth, mixed with sobs and tears. "They took Mom. The police took her handcuffed. But it wasn't her, Aunt Caroline, I swear it wasn't her. It was Dr. Carter, I heard everything. He was on the phone, saying he unplugged the patient's machines and that he was going to blame Mom." Caroline felt her blood run cold in her veins as she listened to the girl's desperate account. Sophia continued, her voice trembling. "He talked about money, about the mafia. He said he had already prepared everything to make it look like it was Mom. And now he knows I heard, he saw me there. Aunt Caroline, I'm so scared. They can't arrest Mom, she's innocent." The nurse hugged Sophia tightly, her own heart racing with the gravity of the situation she had just uncovered. The despair in Sophia's voice was palpable as she described every detail of the conversation she had overheard. Her wide eyes glistened with unshed tears, and her quickened breathing showed the terror that still gripped her small body. "He said Mom's fingerprints would be on the machines, that no one would suspect him because he's the director," Sophia repeated, as if trying to process the cruelty of what she had heard. "Aunt Caroline, he smiled when the police took Mom. He smiled." The last words came out as a muffled scream, childlike indignation mingling with fear. Her small hand gripped Caroline's shirt tightly, as if afraid that letting go would make everything even more real. Caroline had to take a deep breath to stay calm, knowing she needed to be strong for the girl. The empty hallway around them seemed to narrow, making the air heavier, more oppressive. The hospital, once a place of healing and safety, now felt like a cold and dangerous labyrinth. Caroline cupped Sophia's face in her hands, feeling the tremor of her cold skin. "Sophia, my love, you were so brave to come and tell me this. Your mother would be proud of you," she said softly, her tone trying to convey reassurance even with the avalanche of thoughts dominating her mind. "But now, we need to be very careful. Dr. Carter is a powerful man, and if he finds out that you told me..." Caroline hesitated for a moment, swallowing hard before continuing. Sophia's expression changed slightly. Her eyes, still full of tears, narrowed with determination. "He can't hurt anyone else, Aunt Caroline," she whispered, her voice carrying an untimely maturity that broke the nurse's heart. "Mum always says that when we see something wrong, we have to tell the truth. And I saw. I heard." She shook her head, pushing away any doubt. Mom needs us. Caroline pursed her lips, the weight of the decision crushing her chest. Sophia was right. The truth had to be told. But how? I'll take you somewhere safe, she decided, her voice steadier now. And then I'll do everything I can to help your mom. I promise I won't leave her alone in this. But you need to be brave and trust me, okay? Caroline gently touched the girl's cheek, trying to convey a comforting warmth. Sophia took a deep breath, trying to hold back sobs. Then, with a firm nod, she grabbed Caroline's hand tightly. I trust you, Aunt Caroline. But what if he finds out? He's already after me, I know he is, she murmured, her restless gaze sweeping the hallway. Don't worry about that now, Caroline responded quickly, casting a quick look around before pulling Sophia away from there. First, we'll make sure you're safe. Then we'll prove your mum's innocence, and this time Dr. Carter won't be smiling. Night had fallen over the hospital when Caroline returned to her shift, after leaving Sophia safely with a trusted neighbor. The silence of the night corridors felt even heavier with the weight of the secret she carried. Her years of experience as a nurse had taught her the exact moments when vigilance waned, and she knew she had to seize every second. As she carried out her regular rounds, her mind worked out a plan to access the patient's medical records without raising suspicion. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the empty hallways as she made her way to the records wing, her heart pounding with every corner she turned. With trembling fingers and watchful eyes for any movement, Caroline began her meticulous search through the medical records. The case files were surprisingly well organized, almost as if they had been prepared to be found, a detail that did not escape her keen perception. The hours ticked by as she examined every document, every note, every vital sign log. It was when she reached the tests performed in the early hours of the incident that her heart nearly stopped. The electroencephalogram exam, performed 2 hours before the time when Rebecca was supposed to have unplugged the machines, clearly showed there was no brain activity. The patient had been clinically dead long before the alleged crime took place. Caroline felt her hands tremble as she held the revealing document, her tears threatening to stain the paper that could save her best friend. The exam had been signed and stamped, with time and date recorded irrefutably. My God, Rebecca. You couldn't have done it because he was already dead, she whispered to herself, quickly photographing each page with her cell phone. The distant sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze for a moment, but it was just the security guards making their regular rounds. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely hold the papers as she carefully reorganized them, ensuring everything went back exactly where it belonged. The discovery of the examination was just the beginning. Caroline knew she needed to act with extreme caution to avoid alerting Dr. Carter that someone had found this crucial evidence. As she stored the files, her mind worked furiously, planning the next steps. The examination proved Rebecca's innocence, but it also confirmed that Dr. Carter had manipulated the entire situation, and people capable of setting up such an elaborate trap would certainly not hesitate to silence anyone who discovered the truth. The fear for Sophia's safety intensified even more with this realization, and Caroline understood why Rebecca had instructed her daughter to seek her out in her moment of desperation. Before leaving the archive room, Caroline did one last check to ensure everything was exactly as she had found it. Her shift was almost over, and she needed to keep up appearances. As she walked back to her station, her mind spun with the implications of her discovery. The examination was irrefutable proof, but how to use it without putting everyone involved at risk? Sophia's words about the mafia echoed in her mind, reminding her that they were dealing with something much larger and more dangerous than a simple false accusation. The cell phone in her pocket, containing photos of the examination, seemed to weigh a ton, carrying with it both the hope of liberation and the danger of its discovery. The days that followed Rebecca's arrest turned the hospital into a suffocating environment of fear and mistrust. Caroline watched with growing apprehension as employees who had previously openly defended Rebecca's innocence now averted their gaze and changed direction upon seeing her in the hallways. During her cautious investigation, she discovered that a morning shift nurse had been mysteriously transferred after mentioning she had seen something strange on the day of the incident. The message was clear. Anyone who tried to help Rebecca would face consequences. Dr. Carter's shadow of power stretched across every corner of the hospital, turning former allies into frightened and silent people. The threats began subtly, almost imperceptible to those who weren't looking for them. A nursing technician who had offered to testify in Rebecca's favor suddenly resigned, her hands trembling as she emptied her locker. When Caroline tried to talk to her, the woman only whispered, tears streaming down her face, I have 2 young children at home. I can't take the risk. They know where I live. They know the children's school. Forgive me, but I can't help." Before Caroline could respond, the technician had already disappeared down the hallway, leaving only the echo of her hurried footsteps and the overwhelming weight of helplessness in the air. The protective circle around Sophia was also beginning to unravel. The neighbor who had initially agreed to take care of the girl received a friendly visit from well-dressed men who politely suggested she reconsider her involvement with a murderer's family. Caroline found Sophia crying on the hospital's emergency staircase that afternoon after the girl discovered she had nowhere else to go. "Aunt Caroline, did they do something to Aunt Maria?" She was trembling when she said she couldn't take me in anymore. "Why is everyone so afraid?" The childlike voice carried an understanding too painful for her age. Caroline hugged the girl tightly, feeling her own heart break as she realized they were running out of options and allies. The situation reached its darkest point when Caroline tried to present the exam she had discovered to a recommended lawyer. The man barely looked at the documents before handing them back, his face pale and voice trembling. "I'm sorry, but I can't take this case. The last lawyer who tried to defend someone against Dr. Carter suffered a very convenient accident. I have a family, you understand?" His words echoed in Caroline's mind as she drove back home that night, the weight of hopelessness growing in her chest. The exam that proved Rebecca's innocence now seemed more like a curse than a salvation. Having the truth in hand, but being unable to use it, was a particularly cruel form of torture. That night, sitting in her apartment with Sophia sleeping in the next room, Caroline stared at the exam photos on her phone, feeling cornered. Dr. Carter had created such an efficient web of fear that even those who knew the truth were paralyzed, unable to act. The tears she had held back all day finally escaped as she whispered a silent prayer. "Rebecca, forgive me. I have the proof that could free you, but anyone who tries to help ends up being threatened or worse. How can I protect your daughter and still fight for you?" The silence of the night was her only answer, as fear and hopelessness tightened their siege, turning every attempt at help into yet another path, blocked by the menacing shadow of power and corruption. Caroline watched the rain through the window of her small apartment, her thoughts as clouded as the sky that morning. Sophia slept in the next room, finally able to rest after another night of nightmares. The phone on the kitchen table held the precious exam photos that could save Rebecca, but finding someone willing to use that evidence was proving an almost impossible task. The past 2 weeks had become an endless sequence of closed doors and frightened looks, as each potential ally retreated before the threatening shadow of the mafia protecting Dr. Carter. The most recent office she had visited was still vivid in her memory. The middle-aged lawyer with tired eyes had listened to her account with growing attention, even showing genuine interest as he examined the exam photos. However, a quick computer search was enough to make his face pale. "Mrs. Caroline, this case, Dr. Carter's name is involved. I'm sorry, but I can't help. I've seen 3 colleagues lose everything for taking on people connected to him. One of them simply vanished." His hands trembled as he returned the phone, practically begging her to leave his office as quickly as possible. "Please, forget you were here. I can't risk my family for this." Attempts with the press hadn't been any different. Caroline still remembered the expression of the young reporter who met her in a cafe far from downtown. Her eyes had shone with the possibility of a major investigative story, but the enthusiasm lasted only until she made a call to her editor. "I'm sorry, but we can't publish anything about this. The last newspaper that tried to investigate Dr. Carter suffered a mysterious fire at their headquarters. 3 journalists were hospitalized, coincidentally at the same hospital where he's the director." The reporter had left some notes on the table, whispering quickly before leaving, "You need someone who has nothing to lose. I have a family to protect." In her apartment, now transformed into an improvised refuge, Caroline had created a meticulous routine to protect Sophia and the exam. The photos were saved on 3 different devices, hidden in distinct locations. The girl no longer attended school, studying through online lessons to avoid being located. The curtains remained always closed, and outings were limited to essentials. "Aunt Caroline," Sophia asked one night, her small voice laden with premature maturity, "why are good people so afraid to help? My dad always said good wins in the end." Caroline hugged the girl tightly, feeling her heart tighten. "Sometimes, dear, good people need to protect other people they love, but we will find someone brave enough to help us, I promise." The visits to Rebecca in prison were moments of bitter-sweet joy. Caroline brought Sophia in disguise, always through different routes, constantly checking if they were not being followed. Rebecca grew thinner with each visit, but her eyes gained a special glow when she saw her daughter. "You need to stop coming," Rebecca whispered during the last meeting, her handcuffed hands squeezing Caroline's. "Carter has people watching the prison. I can't bear the idea of something happening to you." Caroline shook her head, determined. "I have the exam that proves your innocence, Rebecca. We just need to find someone brave enough to use it." Rebecca's sad smile said she too knew how difficult that task would be. Back at the apartment that night, as she checked the locks on the doors and windows once more, Caroline felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. It wasn't just the exam she needed to protect, but also the fragile hope it represented. Sophia approached silently, holding the miniature lab coat she used to wear at the hospital. "Aunt Caroline, what if we told the truth to everyone ourselves?" The girl's innocent question planted a seed in her mind. A dangerous idea, but one that was beginning to seem like the only possible option. Perhaps when all doors close, you need to create a new entrance, even if it means risking everything. The hospital's dead file room was in the basement, a maze of metal shelves that held years of medical histories under a flickering fluorescent light. Caroline had carefully chosen her moment, a Sunday night, when the staff was reduced and supervision more relaxed. Her hands trembled slightly as she rummaged through the folders, searching for any connection to Rebecca's case. The discovery of the exam proving her friend's innocence had awakened a disturbing suspicion. If Dr. Carter had orchestrated this situation so meticulously, would this be the first time? The dust from the files made her eyes sting, but each folder she opened revealed more pieces of a macabre puzzle she didn't even know existed. The first case that caught her attention dated back 8 months. A man identified only as patient 317 had been admitted with gunshot wounds. Caroline recognized the pattern. Just like in the current case, the man had ties to the local mafia. His death had been recorded as cardiac arrest during the night, but the nursing notes showed serious inconsistencies in the timings. Even more intriguing was the fact that the nurse responsible for that shift had resigned the next day, inexplicably moving to another state. The coincidences were beginning to form a disturbing pattern. As her investigation progressed, more similar cases emerged from the depths of the archives. 3 months before the incident with Rebecca, another patient linked to organized crime had died under hazy circumstances. The medical report indicated multiple organ failure, but Caroline found loose notes suggesting the patient was recovering well until the night of his death. Again, the monitoring records showed inexplicable gaps, and the nurse in charge had been mysteriously promoted and transferred to another unit of the hospital. "My God, Rebecca wasn't the first," Caroline murmured to herself, feeling a chill run down her spine. She was just the first to be openly blamed. The most alarming discovery came from a case just 2 weeks before Rebecca's arrest. A folder marked "Stroke" caught her attention for being disheveled, as if it had been hastily consulted. Upon examining its contents, Caroline found a familiar pattern. Another known member of the mafia admitted after a confrontation, dead during the night. What made this case particularly suspicious was a scribbled handwritten note in the margin of one of the exams. "Patient shows significant improvement. Positive prognosis for recovery." The note had been made just 4 hours before the recorded time of death. Caroline photographed each document with trembling hands, her heart beating faster with every new piece of evidence she found. The distant sound of footsteps in the corridor made Caroline freeze momentarily. Quickly recomposing herself, she began to reorganize the files, her mind processing all the information she had just uncovered. In less than a year, 4 mafia-linked patients had died at the hospital, all during the night, all with inconsistent records, and in each case, the responsible nursing professional had been removed in some way. Transfer, voluntary resignation, or in Rebecca's case, arrest. The pattern was too clear to be a coincidence. Dr. Carter wasn't just eliminating mafia enemies, he was creating a system to get rid of unwanted witnesses. As she closed the last filing cabinet drawer, Caroline felt the weight of the discovery on her shoulders. It was no longer just about proving Rebecca's innocence. She had uncovered a much larger and more dangerous scheme. Her phone now held evidence of multiple suspicious cases, each one a thread in a web of corruption and death that extended far beyond what she had initially imagined. As she climbed the stairs back to the upper floors, Caroline realized she had crossed a point of no return. The knowledge she now possessed made her even more vulnerable, but also more determined. Rebecca hadn't been the first victim of this macabre scheme, but Caroline was determined to ensure she would be the last. It was late into the night when Caroline finally allowed herself a moment of emotional release with her friend Helena, a history teacher she had known since college. Sophia was asleep in the next room, and the two women shared a bottle of red wine on the small balcony of the apartment, the only place where Caroline felt safe to openly converse. The weight of the past few weeks of investigation and dark discoveries seemed even heavier that night, especially after another frustrating visit to a potential ally who had refused to help. The tears Caroline had been holding back for days finally began to fall as she shared with her friend all the evidence she had uncovered, the pattern of suspicious deaths at the hospital, and the apparent impossibility of doing anything about it. Helena listened attentively, her eyes reflecting the faint light from the veranda as she absorbed every detail of the story. "It's like we're living in a mafia movie, you know?" Caroline vented, refilling her glass once more. "I have all this evidence, I know exactly what happened, but no one has the courage to help us. Every lawyer, every journalist, everyone has something to lose. And the worst part is that I understand their fear. I've seen what these people are capable of." Her voice trembled as she recalled the cases she had uncovered in the hospital's files, the lives that had been silently erased under Dr. Carter's command. Helena remained silent for a few moments, her gaze lost in the city that stretched beyond the veranda, before making an observation that would change everything. "Maybe that's the problem. We're seeking help from the wrong people, people who have something to lose." The comment hovered in the air for a few moments as the two women sipped their wines, lost in thought. It was then that a soft noise caught their attention. Sophia had woken up and was standing at the veranda door, hugging her favorite teddy bear. "I can't sleep," the girl murmured, her eyes still sleepy but alert. Helena observed Sophia's small figure, and something in her expression changed. "Caroline, have you ever thought that maybe the answer is right in front of us? Who better to expose the truth than someone Dr. Carter can't threaten or silence? Someone whose mere presence would force people to listen." The idea began to take shape as Helena continued, a 9-year-old child bursting into the courtroom with proof of her mother's innocence. Not even the mafia could stop that without creating an even bigger scandal. Caroline's heart raced with the possibility that presented itself. Sophia, who had come closer to snuggle up in her lap, asked in her childlike voice, "Like Daddy did when he had to save someone?" The mention of Sophia's father, the military nurse who had given his life to save others, prompted a moment of crystal clarity. "My God, Helena," Caroline whispered, her eyes wide with understanding. "That's it." Sophia was the first to discover the truth. She heard Carter's confession. She has her father's courage running through her veins. And most importantly, what kind of monster would try to silence a child in the middle of a courtroom? The idea was bold, even dangerous, but the more they thought about it, the more it seemed the only possible solution. The following hours were dedicated to refining the plan, while Sophia, now fully awake, actively participated in the discussion. The small apartment where they were hiding became an improvised headquarters, with scribbled notes on scattered sheets of paper, hastily drawn maps, and Caroline mentally reorganizing every detail to ensure that nothing was left to chance. The yellowish light from the lamp cast long shadows on the walls, and the sound of the clock's ticking seemed to amplify the urgency of the moment. The air was permeated with a mix of tension and hope, a pulsating energy that transformed the room into a silent battlefield. Sophia demonstrated a surprising understanding of the situation and a determination that greatly resembled her father's. With each new idea presented, her eyes shone with intelligence and courage, absorbing everything as if she were a true strategist. "I'm not afraid of Dr. Carter," Sophia declared, her voice firm and resolute as she drummed her little fingers on the wooden table. Her words made Caroline and Helena exchange emotional glances. "He hurt my mom and other people. Someone needs to make him stop." The conviction in her tone left no room for doubt. This 9-year-old girl carried the strength of a heroine within her. Caroline sighed, running a hand through her hair, feeling the weight of responsibility. "Sophia, do you understand that this could be dangerous?" she asked softly, trying to ensure that the girl was aware of the risks. But Sophia merely nodded, her expression hardened by something beyond her years. "I know, but it doesn't matter. If I don't do anything, who else will?" The silence that followed was dense, as if that truth weighed upon them all. The wine was forgotten as they discussed the details. How to enter the courtroom without drawing attention, what would be the exact moment for Sophia to appear, how to ensure she would have a voice before anyone could stop her. Every possibility was analyzed and reorganized until everything made sense. "You need to speak firmly," Caroline instructed, gently holding the girl's hands. "Don't let anyone interrupt before you show the exam. As soon as the judge realizes what you have, he'll want to hear you." Sophia nodded, etching each instruction into her mind. The night wore on, but for the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of real hope in Caroline's eyes. It wasn't just a plan, it was a real chance at justice, born from a child's innocence and the courage inherited from a hero. The faint light of dawn began to seep through the cracks in the curtain, bathing Sophia's face with a soft glow. She looked different now, more mature, stronger. Caroline realized that regardless of what happened in the courtroom, this girl had already become a warrior. "We're going to do this right," Caroline whispered, putting her hand on Sophia's shoulder. "And we're going to win." The cold prison corridor echoed with the sound of Caroline and Sophia's footsteps as she walked in disguise, a cap covering her hair and glasses too large for her delicate face. The girl's heart raced as they passed through the guard's thorough search, who barely glanced at the fake documents Caroline had obtained, identifying Sophia as her niece. The smell of disinfectant mixed with sadness permeated the air, making the girl's eyes burn behind the non-prescription lenses. Her small hands nervously clutched the hem of her coat as they passed through another metal door, the heavy sound of the locks closing behind them making her jump. The visitor's room was an austere environment, with concrete tables fixed to the floor and surveillance cameras in every corner. Sophia felt her heart stop for a moment when she saw her mother being brought in by a guard. Rebecca was thinner, her face marked by weariness and worry, but her eyes lit up when she saw her daughter, even through the disguise. The orange prison uniform looked too large on her now fragilized body, and her hands, once always steady while caring for patients, trembled slightly as she sat down. "My little one," Rebecca whispered, her voice choked with emotion, restraining herself from using her daughter's real name and drawing attention. "You look so beautiful." Sophia fought against the urge to throw herself into her mother's arms, remembering Caroline's instructions to maintain discretion. The meeting was a delicate dance between what could and could not be said. Rebecca tried to maintain a brave smile as she asked about the online classes Sophia was having, her eyes constantly checking the guards circulating around the room. Caroline watched the cameras closely, her body tense every time Sophia seemed about to mention the exam or anything related to the case. The girl in turn frequently bit her lips, swallowing the words she desperately wanted to share with her mother. "Are you eating properly? Sleeping well?" Rebecca asked, her restless hands on the concrete table, clearly resisting the urge to touch her daughter's face. Sophia nodded, silent tears streaming down behind her oversized glasses. The hardest moment came when Sophia could no longer contain her hope. "Mom, we found something that will—" she began to say, but Caroline quickly coughed, a prearranged signal for her to stop. Rebecca sensed the sudden tension, and with a mother's wisdom quickly changed the subject. "Do you know what else I miss? Our bedtime story session. Do you still have that book about the brave princess who saved her kingdom?" The meaningful look she exchanged with Caroline said that she had understood something important was happening, but also understood the danger of showing any knowledge of it there, under constant surveillance. The 30 minutes allowed for the visit passed like a breath, a cruelly short interval to kill the accumulated longing. The clock on the wall advanced relentlessly, each second a reminder that this moment would soon end. The strong smell of disinfectant and the cold walls of the visiting room only reinforced the harshness of the separation imposed between mother and daughter. When the guard announced the end of the time, Sophia began to tremble, fear and longing mingling in her small body in an overwhelming way. Her eyes, which until then had tried to remain steady, filled with tears that she struggled to contain, as if holding them back was a way to prove her strength to her mother. Rebecca maintained her strong posture, even though her heart seemed to be being torn out, her fingers previously resting on the cold table clenched into fists, an attempt to contain the urge to pull her daughter into her arms and never let go. But she knew that farewell was inevitable. "Be brave, my love," her voice came out as a whisper, but laden with a weight that Sophia felt in her chest. "Always remember that Mom loves you more than anything in this world." Her tone, though soft, carried a contained despair, as if each word were an anchor for her daughter to cling to in moments of uncertainty. Sophia bit her lips, holding back the sob that threatened to escape, and nodded, trying to absorb every detail of her mother's face to store it in her memory. Caroline, realizing that the girl was about to collapse, gently held her shoulder, guiding her away before the separation became even more painful. As Rebecca was escorted back to her cell, Sophia turned one last time, and the image that remained etched in her mind was that of her mother's brave and sad smile, trying to hide her own tears so as not to increase her daughter's pain. On the way back, the corridors seemed longer and emptier, and each step echoed heavily. Sophia resisted no more. She buried her face in Caroline's shoulder, allowing herself to cry openly. Her small body shook with sobs that carried not only sadness but something deeper, a silent anger against injustice and a growing determination. Her small hands clenched into fists against the fabric of Caroline's blouse. She was not just a frightened child. She was a daughter willing to do anything to save her mother. And in that moment, amid tears and muffled sobs, Sophia made an irrevocable decision. She would not leave her mother alone in that fight. The first sign that something was wrong came when Caroline noticed the black car parked across the street from the prison. Her years of experience as a nurse had sharpened her danger instinct, and something about the way the two men inside the vehicle watched the exit made her heart race. Holding Sophia firmly by the hand, she guided the girl in the opposite direction, keeping a brisk but controlled pace so as not to arouse suspicion. Through the reflection of the storefronts, she could see the car slowly starting to move, following them at a distance. "Sophia, dear, remember that spy game you like? Let's play it now, but you need to do exactly what I say," she whispered, feeling the little hand squeeze hers in understanding. The next few hours turned into a tense dance through the city streets. Caroline led Sophia through narrow alleys and shopping malls, always changing direction, always aware of the steps following them. At one particularly frightening moment, they hid inside a clothing store, watching through the windows as two men in suits passed by, looking for them with predatory stares. Sophia remained remarkably calm, though Caroline could feel the tremor in her body. "Aunt Caroline," the girl whispered when the men finally moved away, "are they the bad people who hurt Mom?" The question made Caroline's heart ache, reminding her of how much they needed to protect not only their lives, but also the evidence that could save Rebecca. Caroline's apartment was no longer safe, nor were any of the obvious places where they could hide. They spent the following nights constantly changing locations. A small hotel on the outskirts, the home of a former college colleague who didn't ask questions, even one night in a church that kept its doors open for those in need. The evidence was digitized on 3 different flash drives, hidden in separate locations, a precaution that now seemed more necessary than ever. "Like the heroes in the movies," Sophia commented one night, as they hurriedly packed a small backpack with essentials after noticing a suspicious car parked on the street. The constant pursuit was beginning to take its toll. Caroline barely slept, always alert to any suspicious noise, always planning the next move. Sophia tried to stay strong, but her nights were often interrupted by nightmares. At one particularly difficult moment, while hiding in the basement of a church, the girl cried silently, hugging her stuffed bear. "I wish I was braver like Daddy, but I'm scared." Caroline hugged her tightly, fighting back her own tears. "Your father would be proud of you, dear. Sometimes true courage is continuing to fight, even when we're afraid." The days turned into a week and then into 2. Each new hideout seemed more precarious than the previous one. Every shadow could conceal a threat. Caroline's phone, containing the original photos of the test, was kept in a sealed envelope inside a locker at the bus station, while the pen drives were distributed in different locations around the city. They couldn't stay too long in the same place. They couldn't fully trust anyone. During a particularly dark night, while watching Sophia finally sleeping on a borrowed mattress, Caroline realized they were trapped in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The trial date was approaching, and they needed to survive. Until then, they needed to keep the test safe. They needed to keep hope alive. Each day was a new battle for survival. Every moment of rest could be interrupted by a new threat, but the determination to save Rebecca kept them moving, always one step ahead of their pursuers. The news came during mealtime at the prison, through a guard who was casually commenting on the visit that Dr. Carter had made to the institution that morning. Rebecca, who kept her ears always alert for any mention of the man who had incriminated her, felt her blood run cold upon overhearing the conversation. He was asking about her daughter, wanted to know if the girl had shown up for visits. He said he's worried about the child's well-being since the mother is in prison. The words hit Rebecca like a punch to the stomach, causing her to drop the lunch tray she had barely touched. The noise drew the attention of the other inmates, but she barely registered the looks in her direction, her mind gripped by a paralyzing terror. The following hours turned into a nightmare of anxiety and fear. Locked in her cell, Rebecca paced back and forth like a caged animal, her nails leaving marks on her palms from clenching her hands so tightly. Tears streamed freely down her face as horrific images invaded her mind. Her little Sophia being pursued, Caroline trying to protect her, dangerous men searching for her daughter. The panic grew in her chest like a suffocating wave, making her heart beat so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Please, my God, "Protect my little girl," she whispered repeatedly, her words turning into desperate sobs. The collapse came during the night count. When the guard passed by her cell, Rebecca clung to the bars, her face contorted with anguish. "My daughter is in danger, don't you understand? I don't know what they can do to her. Please, I need to call someone, I need to warn them." Her voice, normally controlled and dignified, had turned into hysterical screams that echoed through the prison corridors. The guards tried to calm her down, but Rebecca was beyond control, years of strength and composure crumbling before the fear for Sophia's safety. Her body shook violently as she continued pleading, her words barely making sense amidst the crying. "She's only 9 years old. She's all I have. Please don't let him find my little girl." It took the intervention of the infirmary to finally calm Rebecca down. The small white room she was taken to felt cold and impersonal, lit only by the flickering fluorescent light on the ceiling. Lying on a narrow bed, the rough sheets contrasted with the softness of the tears that still marked her face. Her wrists, scratched from gripping the cell bars, trembled involuntarily. Her lips continued to move, whispering silent prayers as her vacant eyes fixed on the ceiling, not really seeing it. The sedative was starting to take effect, but even the chemical haze couldn't free her from the fear. Her last word before succumbing was a broken whisper, "William," a final desperate plea for her deceased husband to protect Sophia. A solitary tear rolled down the corner of her closed eye, reflecting the fragility of a mother who couldn't protect her child. On another occasion, the summons to report to Dr. Carter's office came in the middle of Caroline's shift. The message, delivered by a visibly nervous secretary, sounded like an ominous prelude of what was to come. Caroline felt her stomach churn as she climbed to the top floor of the hospital, her steps echoing down the empty hallway leading to the administration's office. The pristine white walls, which once represented her workplace and vocation, now felt suffocating. Her hands trembled slightly as she knocked on the door, and the director's soft voice, inviting her in, sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. The office was bathed in the dimness of late afternoon, the partially closed blinds casting elongated shadows that danced across the walls. Dr. Carter was seated behind his imposing mahogany desk, a polite yet menacing smile on his thin lips. "Caroline, good that you could come. Please have a seat." His voice was smooth as velvet, but carried an undertone that made all of Caroline's instincts scream danger. On the desk in front of her, an old file was open, and her heart nearly stopped when she recognized the date. It was from 5 years ago, a case she had tried so hard to forget, a night that haunted her darkest nightmares. "You know, I've been reviewing some old cases," Dr. Carter began, slowly flipping through the file, "and I found something very interesting about a particular night. A young woman came into the emergency room with a severe allergic reaction. The nurse in charge, distracted by an unusually busy shift, administered the wrong medication. His words fell like stones in the silence of the office, each one making Caroline relive that terrible moment. The patient survived by a miracle, and the incident was conveniently forgotten. But records, Caroline, records never completely disappear." His smile was now openly cruel, his eyes fixed on hers like a predator watching its prey. The air in the office grew heavier as Dr. Carter continued his calculated exposition. "It would be a shame if this case were to come to light now, wouldn't it? A dedicated nurse like you, with such a promising career, having your license revoked for negligence, and of course with a criminal investigation underway, who could take care of little Sophia?" The mention of Rebecca's daughter's name made Caroline feel as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Her nails dug into the arms of the chair as she struggled to maintain her composure, her heart pounding so hard it seemed like it wanted to escape her chest. Carter rose slowly, circling the desk to lean on it, disturbingly close to Caroline. "I have a simple proposal. You stop playing detective, forget anything you may have uncovered, and that file stays exactly where it is. Keep meddling, and not only will your career be over, but there will be no one to protect that sweet little girl." The veiled threat in his words was as clear as crystal, making Caroline feel nauseous. The past medical error she had carried as a weight on her conscience for years now became a weapon in the hands of that cruel man. As she stood to leave the office, her legs trembling so much they could barely support her, Caroline could feel Carter's satisfied gaze burning into her back, like that of a predator who had just cornered its prey. The air seemed heavier, as if the room were closing in around her. The fear and guilt of the past mingled with the terror of the present, creating an emotional storm that threatened to consume her. In the hallway, away from the predatory eyes of the director, she leaned against the cold wall, her chest rising and falling in short, ragged breaths. The tears came before she could stop them, streaming hot down her pale face. Her mind spun, crushed by the impossibility of the choice before her: save Rebecca and expose Sophia to danger, or back down and carry the weight of cowardice forever. The hospital around her seemed distant, its cold lights casting shadows that danced on the walls, reflecting the growing darkness within her. Outside, the sun was slowly setting, tinting the sky with shades of red and orange, as if the horizon itself were bleeding. Caroline knew that no matter what decision she made, nothing would ever be the same again. Sophia silently watched as Caroline cried in the next room, thinking the girl was already asleep. Through the crack in the door, she could see her holding an old photo where she appeared wearing her first nurse's uniform, her hands trembling as she murmured about impossible choices and terrible consequences. It wasn't the first time Sophia noticed the weight Caroline carried to protect her, but something was different that night. The fear in her voice, the way her hands wouldn't stop shaking, the way she kept looking out the window. Everything indicated that the situation had worsened. Sophia clutched the old teddy bear her father had given her to her chest, feeling the courage she so desperately needed begin to grow in her heart. In her small makeshift room, Sophia retrieved the box where she kept her most precious memories from under the mattress. Inside, along with old photos and small childhood treasures, was the last letter her father had written before his final act of heroism. With delicate fingers, she traced the words she had read so many times. "My little warrior, sometimes being brave means doing something scary because it's the right thing to do. It doesn't matter how afraid we are. What matters is moving forward." Her father's words, which had always been a comfort, now became a call to action. Sophia took her school notebook and began taking notes, her childish handwriting carefully tracing every detail of her plan. The courthouse was not far from their current hideout, and Sophia had memorized the route during one of their location changes. She knew her mother's trial would be in 3 days. She had overheard Caroline commenting about it on the phone. In her notebook, with the determination of a pint-sized strategist, she began to draw what she would need: a map of the route to the courthouse, based on what she remembered, the schedules she had memorized from conversations between the adults, and, most importantly, the location where Caroline kept one of the copies of the examination. Her plan was simple, but it needed to be perfect. Dad always said a good plan is like a rescue operation. Every step needs to be carefully thought out, she whispered to herself, remembering the stories he used to tell about his missions. As the night wore on, Sophia continued refining her plan, occasionally pausing to wipe away silent tears that insisted on falling. It wasn't just fear she felt, it was a mixture of determination and love, so strong it made her little heart ache. In her notebook, next to the plan, she drew her family: her mother in her nurse's uniform, her father in his military fatigues, and herself, small but determined between the two of them. "You taught me to be brave," she wrote under the drawing. "Now it's my turn to prove I learned." Sophia knew Caroline would be distraught when she discovered her plan, but she also understood, with a wisdom beyond her years, that sometimes children need to protect the adults they love. The last thing Sophia did before putting her notebook away was to write a letter to Caroline explaining her decision. "Dear Aunt Caroline," she wrote in her neatest handwriting, "please don't be mad at me. Dad always said that courage isn't not being afraid, but doing the right thing even when you're afraid. I know you're trying to protect me, but now it's my turn to protect you and save Mom. Like Dad did, I'm going to be brave because it's the right thing to do." Putting the letter away with her plan, Sophia finally lay down, hugging her bear tightly. In her mind, her mother's face mingled with memories of her father, and for the first time in many days she fell asleep with a smile on her lips, knowing exactly what she needed to do. Caroline found Sophia's notebook by chance, while tidying up the small room they shared in their current hideout. The meticulously organized pages with maps, schedules, and detailed plans made her heart stop for a moment. The letter addressed to her, written in the girl's careful hand, revealed not just a plan but an understanding of the situation that went far beyond her 9 years. Caroline slowly sat down on the bed, her hands trembling as she read the words Sophia had written, silent tears beginning to stream down her face. The girl's determination, so much like her father's, shone through in every carefully chosen word. Sophia found Caroline still sitting on the bed, the notebook open in her lap. For a moment, fear of being scolded flashed across the girl's face, but it was quickly replaced by a serene determination when she saw her expression. "You're not going to stop me, are you?" Sophia asked softly, sitting down next to Caroline. The nurse looked at the small figure beside her, seeing not just the child she had promised to protect, but a pint-sized warrior carrying the same courage that had made her father a hero. "No, sweetheart," Caroline replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to help you do this right." The smile that lit up Sophia's face in that moment was a perfect blend of relief and determination. The following hours were dedicated to refining every detail of the plan. Caroline used her experience to help Sophia memorize exactly what she should say in court, how she should behave to be heard before anyone could stop her. They practiced together repeatedly. The crucial moment when Sophia would reveal the exam. "For you need to be quick but clear," Caroline instructed, holding Sophia's small but firm hands. "Talk about what you heard at the hospital, show the exam, don't let anyone interrupt you." The girl nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and courage that made Caroline remember William so much. In a particularly emotional moment, Sophia hugged Caroline tightly, whispering, "Aunt Caroline, I'm scared, but Dad used to say that this is part of courage, isn't it?" Caroline just nodded, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. In the quiet of the night before the trial, as the final preparations were being made, Caroline watched Sophia sleeping peacefully, the exam safely tucked against her chest. The moonlight filtered softly through the window, illuminating the girl's face who, in less than 24 hours, would face one of the greatest tests of her young life. Caroline said a silent prayer, asking William to guide the steps of his little warrior from wherever he was. Rebecca's fate, and perhaps much more than that, rested on the shoulders of a 9-year-old child who had decided that fear would not stop her from doing what was right. The small room of the temporary apartment had been transformed into a makeshift courtroom of sorts. Caroline had arranged the chairs to simulate the environment Sophia would face the next day, using a lamp as a focal point to represent where the judge would be seated. The girl stood in the center of the room, her small hands firmly holding the envelope with the exam that could save her mother. Her eyes, though weary after hours of preparation, maintained a gleam of determination that reminded Caroline so much of her father that at times she had to hold back tears as she watched her practice her speech for the 10th time that night. "Your Honor," Sophia began again, her childlike voice gaining a surprising firmness, "I know I shouldn't be here, but I need to show something very important. My mom is being falsely accused, and I have the proof." Her words, though simple, carried the weight of the entire truth she had witnessed. Caroline gently guided her. "Remember, Sophia, you need to be quick but clear. Tell exactly what you heard at the hospital. Show the exam, don't let anyone interrupt you." The girl nodded, clutching the envelope to her chest as she recalled the stories her father used to tell about decisive moments in his missions as a military nurse. The memories of William were like a beacon guiding Sophia through the fear that sometimes threatened to consume her. As she practiced, she remembered the stories he would tell before bed, about how he had saved his comrades in impossible situations, always emphasizing that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the determination to act despite it. "Dad used to say that sometimes we need to be the voice for those who can't speak," Sophia shared with Caroline during a break, her words carrying a maturity that made the nurse swallow hard. "He always said that one moment of courage can change everything, and now I understand what he meant." The night wore on as they refined every detail of the plan. Caroline had drawn a small map, showing Sophia exactly where she should position herself in the courtroom, what would be the best moment to speak up. "You have to wait until the judge asks if anyone has anything to say," Caroline explained, marking the precise moment in the script they had created. "When that happens, you stand up and speak with all the strength you have inside you. Remember, you're not alone. Your dad will be with you, even if we can't see him." Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, imagining her father's strong hand on her shoulder, giving her courage. The final hours before dawn were dedicated to rehearsing every possible scenario. Sophia practiced how she would react if they tried to interrupt her, how she would keep her voice steady, even if Dr. Carter was present, how she would hold the exam so everyone could see. "How did Dad do it when he needed to deliver important news?" she asked at one point. Caroline smiled softly, remembering her friend. "He always said the truth needs to be spoken from the heart, but backed by strength. That's how he got everyone to listen, even in the toughest moments." Sophia repeated those words to herself, like a mantra that fortified her. At the end of the preparation, exhausted but determined, Sophia sat on the small sofa hugging her teddy bear, a gift from her father. Caroline tucked a blanket around her shoulders, watching how even on the verge of sleep, the girl was still murmuring parts of her speech. "Tomorrow," Sophia whispered sleepily, "I'm going to make Mom and Dad proud of me." Caroline gently stroked her hair, knowing that regardless of the outcome, William would already be immensely proud of the little warrior his daughter had become. The metallic sound of handcuffs echoed through the prison's visitor room as Rebecca was led in for an unexpected meeting. Her surprise at seeing Dr. Carter seated at the metal table, wearing his impeccable grey suit and sporting his usual calculated smile, quickly turned to a chilling sense of dread. The last rays of the setting sun filtered through the barred windows, casting elongated shadows that looked like dark fingers reaching across the concrete floor. The guard escorting her positioned himself discreetly in the corner of the room, far enough away to not overhear the conversation, but close enough to intervene if needed. Rebecca slowly took a seat, her handcuffed hands resting on the cold table as she watched the man who had destroyed her life feign modestly adjusting his expensive tie. Rebecca, Carter began, his voice as smooth as poisoned velvet. Tomorrow is a big day for all of us, isn't it? The trial that will decide your future, your freedom, the future of your darling daughter. The mention of Sophia made Rebecca's heart race, but she kept her face impassive, years of experience as a nurse having taught her to mask her emotions. Carter leaned forward, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. You know, I've been noticing some interesting movements in the last few days. People asking questions, documents being checked. It's curious how some people just don't know when to simply accept their fate, isn't it? The hospital director made a studied pause, his fingers softly drumming on the metal table as he observed every minute reaction on Rebecca's face. But I didn't come here to talk about that. Actually, I came to offer a solution that might benefit everyone, especially your little Sophia. The name of her daughter in his mouth sounded like a veiled threat, making Rebecca clench her fists under the table until her nails left marks on her palms. Carter continued, his smile widening like that of a predator about to pounce. It's a very simple proposal, actually. Tomorrow, during the trial, you plead guilty. Take full responsibility. Show remorse, and I personally guarantee that your daughter will remain perfectly safe. Rebecca felt her stomach churn at the proposal, but she kept her voice steady when she finally answered. And if I don't accept, what happens to my daughter? Carter leaned back in his chair, his smile never faltering as he casually gestured. Well, the world can be a very dangerous place for a child alone. Accidents happen every day. It would be a tragedy if something happened to her, wouldn't it? Especially considering she has already lost her father in such a heroic way. The mention of William awakened something deep within Rebecca, a fury she didn't know she still possessed after weeks of imprisonment and despair. You've already taken everything from me, Rebecca replied, her voice low but charged with an intensity that made Carter straighten in his chair. My freedom, my reputation, my job, but you won't use my daughter as a bargaining chip. Her words, though whispered, carried the weight of steel. Sophia is the daughter of a hero, Dr. Carter. She carries her father's courage in her veins, just as I do. I won't lie to protect her, because that would teach her that we must bow to evil. William gave his life defending the truth and protecting the innocent, and I'd rather spend the rest of my life in prison than dishonor his sacrifice. Carter rose slowly, his smile now replaced by an expression of cold calculation. You're making a terrible mistake, Rebecca. Think carefully. A confession means a lighter sentence, perhaps even the possibility of seeing your daughter grow up, even if from afar. A denial, well, the consequences could be far graver than you imagine. Rebecca held his gaze steadily. Years of facing medical emergencies having taught her to remain calm even as her world crumbled around her. The only consequences that matter to me are the lessons I leave for my daughter. And today she will learn that her mother, like her father, chose truth over personal safety. As she watched Carter leave the room, his rigid posture betraying his frustration, Rebecca allowed a single tear to roll down her cheek. It was not a tear of fear or sadness, but of fierce determination that only a mother can understand. In her mind's eye, she could see William's face, his proud smile when she refused to bend to injustices at the hospital, his gentle voice teaching Sophia about the importance of courage and truth. You taught me well, my love, she whispered to herself as she was escorted back to her cell. And now it's my turn to teach our daughter. The sun had fully set by now, plunging the prison into darkness, but within Rebecca's heart a light of hope and resolve continued to burn, fueled by her love for her daughter and the memory of the man who had shown her the true meaning of courage. The soft glow of the lamp illuminated the small space where Sophia sat on the floor, surrounded by sheets of paper and her set of colored pencils by her side. The girl bit her lip in concentration as she wrote, her words flowing straight from her heart to the page, occasionally pausing to wipe away a stubborn tear that escaped. The exam that would save her mother lay beside her, secured inside a large brown envelope that seemed too big for her small hands. The letter she was writing was her way of preparing her mum for what was to come, an explanation of all she had discovered and what she intended to do in court the following day. "Dear Mommy," Sophia wrote in her neatest handwriting, "when you read this letter, I will have already told the truth to everyone. I know you and Daddy always taught me to be brave, and that's what I'll be tomorrow. I found the exam that proves you're innocent, and I'm going to show it to the judge. Don't be mad at me for keeping it a secret, but I needed to protect you just like you've always protected me." Her words flowed like a river of love and determination, each letter charged with the purity of her 9 years and the strength she had inherited from her parents. As Sophia finished her letter, in the kitchen, Caroline received a message that made her blood run cold. The phone vibrated silently, displaying an unknown number. "Keep the girl away from the courthouse tomorrow, or we can't guarantee anyone's safety. Last warning." Her hands trembled as she deleted the message, the weight of the threat causing her stomach to churn. Through the partially open door, she could see Sophia focused on her writing, so small yet so determined, painfully reminiscent of William and his unwavering courage. The contrast between the innocence of the scene and the implied violence of the threat brought tears to her eyes. Sophia carefully folded her letter, placing it along with the exam into the envelope. In her mind, she rehearsed once more the words she would say in court, imagining how her father would have faced such a moment. Gently, she took out the photograph of William she always carried with her, him in his military uniform, smiling proudly on his last day home, and softly kissed the image. "Tomorrow I'll be brave like you, Daddy," she whispered, tucking the photo back into her pocket. The envelope with the letter and exam was carefully hidden inside her favorite jacket, the one she would wear the next day. Caroline watched silently, torn between her duty to protect Sophia and the understanding that some battles must be fought no matter the cost. The threatening message on her phone weighed like lead on her conscience, but as she saw the determination on the young girl's face, she knew she could not stop her. Sophia had inherited not only William's courage, but also the moral strength that had made him a hero. The night advanced quietly, enveloping the city in shadows, while inside that small apartment, a 9-year-old child prepared to face one of the most important moments of her life, armed only with the truth and a courage greater than her size. The courthouse emanated an imposing aura that morning, its marble staircases crowded with reporters and onlookers gathered to follow the case that had shocked the city. The low sun cast elongated shadows across the historic pillars of the building, while luxurious cars pulled up one after the other at the main entrance, disembarking the team of lawyers hired by Dr. Carter. Impeccably suited men and women climbed the steps carrying leather briefcases, their expensive shoes echoing against the polished marble, forming a veritable wall of power and influence around the smiling, confident hospital director as he faced the cameras. At the side entrance, away from the flashes and commotion, Rebecca struggled out of the police van, hindered by her handcuffs. Her orange prison uniform contrasted harshly with the refined courthouse architecture, marking her as an intruder in that setting. Her hair, once always neatly arranged for her hospital shifts, now hung lifelessly around her pale, emaciated face. The escorting officer gripped her arm unnecessarily tight, guiding her through back corridors that would keep her away from public view until the trial began. Each step of the shackles echoed through the empty halls, marking the cadence of her trudge toward what could be her final sentence. Within the courtroom, hidden among the last rows of the public gallery, Caroline and Sophia had arrived early, blending into the forming crowd. The girl wore a navy blue coat that made her look even smaller, the envelope with the exam securely held against her chest. Her eyes, as alert as those of a small cornered animal, never stopped observing every movement in the room. Caroline kept a protective arm around Sophia's shoulders, her own heart beating fast as she watched the triumphant entrance of Dr. Carter's defense team. The lawyers moved like sharks in shallow waters, strategically spreading out around the room, occupying more space than necessary in a clear show of force. The murmur in the room increased when Dr. Carter finally made his entrance. He walked down the central aisle as if he were the protagonist of a well-rehearsed show, occasionally stopping to greet acquaintances with that smile Sophia now knew to be as false as the accusations against her mother. Carter was impeccable in his Italian suit, his face a mask of professional concern that never reached his cold eyes. Sophia felt a shiver at the sight of him, instinctively shrinking closer to Caroline, who gently squeezed her shoulder in response. The envelope in her coat seemed to burn against her chest, constantly reminding her of the weight of the truth she carried. The moment that made everyone's heart clench was when Rebecca was brought into the room. The handcuffs on her wrists jingled softly as she was led to the defense table, where a tired public defender awaited her with a disorganized pile of papers. The contrast between the two tables could not be starker. On one side, a true fortress of legal power. On the other, an exhausted nurse and her overworked lawyer. Rebecca held her head high, but her eyes anxiously scanned the room as if searching for something or someone. Sophia had to fight the urge to run to her mother, her small hands gripping Caroline's arm tightly. The judge entered the courtroom, his black robe swaying as he took his place on the elevated podium. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with expectation and tension. Rebecca sat rigidly in her chair, her handcuffed hands resting on the worn wooden table, while Dr. Carter leaned back comfortably in his leather chair, surrounded by his wall of lawyers. At the back of the room, Sophia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her father's photo in her pocket and the warmth of the envelope against her chest. The moment that would change their lives was about to begin, and only she knew the outcome would be very different from what everyone expected. The prosecutor rose with the confidence of one who had won countless courtroom battles. His impeccable suit and commanding posture contrasted sharply with Rebecca's fragilized figure in her prison uniform. With measured steps, he positioned himself before the jury, his deep voice filling every corner of the room as he began his argument. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to judge not just a crime, but a betrayal of the very essence of the medical oath." Rebecca, an experienced and respected nurse, used her position of trust to commit the most heinous of acts, deliberately taking the life of a patient under her care. The silence in the courtroom was palpable as the prosecutor slowly paced before the jury, gesturing with studied precision. The prosecution will prove that the defendant, driven by a distorted notion of compassion, took it upon herself to disconnect the machines keeping Mr. Charlie Parker alive. The evidence will show that she waited for the quietest moment of the night, when she would be alone with the patient, to carry out her plan. Her fingerprints were found on the equipment, and the security cameras show she was the only person to enter the room during the critical period. Each word was like a stone being piled onto Rebecca's already hunched shoulders. With manipulative mastery, the prosecutor began using Rebecca's exemplary history against her. "We will examine the profile of the accused, a professional known for her extreme dedication to patients, especially the most severe cases. Witnesses will confirm that she often extended her shifts to accompany terminal patients, demonstrating a particular obsession with others' suffering. This same dedication, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this same compassion, led her to commit premeditated murder, convinced she was doing a greater good." Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment, feeling each word twist her virtues into weapons against her. When Dr. Carter was called to testify, his performance was masterful. Wearing an expression of professional remorse, he ascended to the witness stand with the gravity of one carrying an immense weight. "As the hospital's director, it is devastating to be here today," he began, his voice modulated to convey studied sadness. "Rebecca was one of our best nurses, which makes this situation even more tragic. In the weeks leading up to the incident, I noticed changes in her behavior. She became almost obsessively concerned with terminally ill patients, frequently questioning life-sustaining protocols." The false testimony continued, each word carefully chosen to weave a web of convincing lies. "On the night in question, I was in my office finalizing some reports when I received an alert from the monitoring system. Upon checking in person, I found the equipment turned off and Rebecca still in the room. Her justification that the patient was already dead does not hold up against the machine's records, which indicate an abrupt cessation of vital signs." Carter paused dramatically, his eyes filling with perfectly calculated tears. "As a doctor, as a director, as a human being, it was the most difficult decision I've ever made to report such a dedicated employee. But we cannot allow anyone, no matter how well-intentioned, to make life or death decisions on their own." At the defense table, the public defender could barely keep up with the pace of the accusations. His disorganized notes a reflection of the disparity in resources between the parties. Rebecca remained upright in her chair, but each lie skillfully constructed by Carter struck her like a physical blow. At the back of the room, Sophia gripped the envelope with such force that her small fingers were white, while Caroline held her shoulder tightly, preventing her from standing up before the right moment. The prosecutor continued his meticulous construction of the case. "Dr. Carter, in your experience as the hospital director, had you ever noticed similar behavior in other professionals?" Carter adjusted his glasses with false modesty. "Unfortunately, yes. Sometimes healthcare professionals develop what we call a savior syndrome. They start to believe they have the right to decide over the life and death of their patients. In Rebecca's case, her personal history may have contributed to this. After losing her husband, she began to show an almost unhealthy empathy with the suffering of others. The mention of William made Rebecca abruptly raise her head, her eyes finally showing a spark of anger amid the despair. Carter continued, his voice now laden with false compassion. "It's understandable, but not justifiable. The trauma of losing her husband, the pressure of raising a daughter alone. Perhaps this distorted her perception of life and death, but we cannot allow personal tragedies to justify criminal actions." The jury absorbed every word, some members nodding in agreement, completely engrossed in the meticulously constructed narrative. Carter's performance reached its apex when he looked directly at Rebecca, false tears glistening in his eyes. It's a tragedy in every sense. A brilliant professional who succumbed to misguided impulses, a daughter who will grow up without her mother, a patient whose life was cruelly cut short. As an institution, we failed to notice the signs before it was too late. His words echoed through the courtroom, heavy with hypocrisy, while Sophia in the back rows held even tighter the envelope containing the truth that would dismantle that carefully constructed charade. The courtroom plunged into a sepulchral silence when the judge adjusted his glasses, preparing to announce his decision. Rebecca remained seated, her handcuffed hands trembling slightly on the worn defense table, while Dr. Carter exhibited a discreet smile of anticipated triumph. The air in the room was charged with expectation, heavy with the weight of the injustice about to be consummated. In the back rows, Sophia felt her heart beating so hard that she was sure everyone could hear it, her small hands clutching the envelope that carried the truth that could change everything. Before rendering the sentence, the judge's grave voice echoed through the room. "I ask if there is anyone else who wishes to speak in this case." It was at this exact moment that Sophia felt all of her father's courage running through her veins. With a swift movement that caught Caroline by surprise, the girl escaped the protective grip on her shoulder and dashed down the central aisle of the courtroom. The sound of her small steps against the polished wooden floor broke the solemn silence of the room, making all heads turn in her direction. "Your Honor!" Her childlike voice rang out clear and determined as she held the envelope above her head. "I have something very important to show." Chaos ensued instantly. The guards began moving towards her. The prosecutor stood up in protest, and Dr. Carter's face lost all color as he recognized the small figure running towards the judge. Rebecca, who had not initially realized it was her daughter due to the distance, felt her heart stop as she recognized Sophia's voice. "My daughter!" she cried, trying to stand up despite her handcuffs, her tears now flowing freely. Caroline was standing at the back of the room, her hands covering her mouth, torn between fear and hope, as she watched the plan they had rehearsed so many times finally unfold. Sophia reached the area in front of the judge's podium before anyone could stop her, her small body trembling but her voice steady. "Your Honor, my mother is innocent. I have the proof here. Dr. Carter is the one who killed the patient. I heard him confessing on the phone." The envelope she held shook in her hands, but her eyes remained fixed on the judge with the same determination her father used to display in crucial moments. "Please look at the report. The patient was already dead when they said my mother turned off the machines." The silence that followed her words was deafening, broken only by the sound of the envelope being opened with trembling hands by the court officer. At that moment, time seemed to freeze in the courtroom. Rebecca looked at her daughter with a mixture of terror and admiration, tears streaming down her face as she realized what was happening. Dr. Carter had risen abruptly, extremely nervous, his lawyers unsure of what to do around him. The judge, after an initial moment of shock, leaned forward in his seat, his eyes alternating between the small, courageous figure before him and the document that was now being hastily placed in his hands. Sophia remained standing, trembling but determined, the photo of her father weighing in her pocket like a talisman of courage, as the fate of her family hung by a thread in the tense silence of the room. The judge observed the small figure before him with a mixture of awe and curiosity. Sophia, still breathless from her sprint, stood upright despite her diminutive size compared to the imposing podium. Her eyes, though teary, held a steady gaze that so resembled her father's, it made Rebecca stifle a sob from the other side of the room. After a moment's consideration, the judge adjusted his glasses and leaned forward slightly, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Young one, do you understand the gravity of what you're doing? This is a court of justice, and disrupting the proceedings is a very serious action. Sophia nodded solemnly, clutching the envelope to her chest as she responded with a clarity that silenced the last murmurs in the room. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand. My father always said that the truth is the most important thing that exists, even when it's difficult or dangerous to tell. He was a hero, you know, a military nurse who saved people, and now I need to be brave like him to save my mom." Her words, laden with a wisdom beyond her years, made the judge lean back in his chair, visibly touched. With a gesture, he silenced the protests of Dr. Carter's lawyers and motioned for Sophia to continue. The girl took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her father's photo in her pocket as a source of strength. With a voice that began trembling but gained firmness, Sophia began her account. "I was at the hospital that day waiting to have my routine exams. The corridor was empty, and Dr. Carter's office door was ajar. That's when I heard him talking on the phone, confessing that he had turned off the patient's machines and that he was going to blame my mum." Tears began streaming down her face as she continued, but her voice did not falter. "He said he had received money from the mob, that he had already set everything up to make it look like it was my mom. He was laughing, Your Honor, laughing as he said no one would suspect him because he's the hospital director." Dr. Carter's face had lost all color, his hands visibly shaking as his lawyers frantically whispered. Rebecca watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and terror, her own eyes overflowing with tears as Sophia continued her testimony. The girl now gripped the envelope with renewed strength. "But it's not just my word against his, Your Honor. This exam proves that the patient was already dead long before the time they say my mother unplugged the machines. Aunt Caroline found this in the hospital records. It's all here. The exact time, the doctor's signatures, everything." The court officer on the judge's order approached to collect the envelope, but Sophia wasn't done yet. "There's more, Your Honor. After they found out I had overheard everything, they started chasing us. We had to hide, change places several times. Dr. Carter sent men after us, threatened anyone who tried to help my mother." Her childish voice trembled with indignation as she recounted the last weeks of fear and flight. "But you know what my father always said, that fear only has power over us if we let it be bigger than our courage, and I couldn't let fear win, not when my mother is here in jail for something she didn't do." The silence in the courtroom was absolute as the judge carefully examined the exam, his eyes widening slightly as he confirmed the document's authenticity. Sophia continued, now looking directly at her mother. "My mother is a hero like my father was. She saves lives every day, takes care of people, works extra shifts just to stay with patients who are alone and scared. She would never ever hurt anyone." Sophia's words echoed through the room, carrying the weight of the truth that could no longer be denied. Turning back to the judge, Sophia concluded with a maturity that made several present dab at discreet tears. "Your Honor, I know I'm just a child, but I learned from my parents that sometimes we have to fight for the truth, no matter how scary it is. Dr. Carter is lying. He killed that man, then tried to blame my mother, and now he's trying to scare us into not telling the truth. But I'm not afraid of him anymore, because the truth is stronger than any lie." Her small shoulders shook, but her chin remained high, her eyes fixed on the judge with a silent plea for justice. Rebecca, still handcuffed at her table, openly sobbed now, her heart overflowing with love and pride for her little one's courage. At the back of the room, Caroline too cried silently, watching the result of all those nights of preparation and rehearsal. Dr. Carter had abruptly risen to his feet, his face furious, but was quickly restrained by his own lawyers, who realized the situation had spiraled completely out of control. The judge, still holding the exam proving Rebecca's innocence, looked at little Sophia with an expression mixing admiration and respect, recognizing in that 9-year-old child the embodiment of the justice his court represented. Dr. Carter rose abruptly from his chair, his formerly pale face now mottled red with rage. His mask of professional dignity was visibly cracking as he pointed an accusatory finger at Sophia. "Your Honor, this is an outrage. Are we really going to allow a 9-year-old child, clearly manipulated by others, to disrupt a serious legal proceeding? This girl is obviously confused, traumatized by her mother's arrest. We cannot take the fantasies of a child seriously." His voice, normally controlled and smooth, now pitched between high tones of desperation and low ones of forced authority. The judge, however, kept his eyes fixed on the exam in his hands, his expression growing increasingly severe. "Dr. Carter, this document clearly shows the patient was already brain dead 2 hours before the time Mrs. Rebecca allegedly unplugged the machines. How do you explain this discrepancy?" The question hung in the air like a sentence, making Carter swallow hard before attempting to recompose himself. Obviously, this document is a forgery. That nurse, Caroline, must have forged it. She's always been too close to the accused. They have access to the hospital records." But his words were cut off by the judge's firm voice. "Curious you should mention that, because this exam bears your own signature and stamp, Dr. Carter. Are you suggesting you forged your own signature?" The ensuing silence was deafening. Carter opened and closed his mouth several times, his face alternating between red and white as he tried to find an explanation. It was at this moment that his control began to unravel completely. No, yes, this exam shouldn't be here. These documents are confidential. They were stolen from the hospital." Sophia, still standing before the judge, watched with wide eyes as the man she had so feared unraveled into contradictions. The prosecutor, sensing the tide turning, quietly began edging away from the prosecution's table. Carter, now gesticulating frantically, kept digging his own hole. "That patient was dangerous, you don't understand. He needed to be. The machines needed." No, it wasn't like that. His own lawyers began gathering their briefcases, silently abandoning the sinking ship. The judge rose to his full authority, his voice cutting the air like a blade. "Dr. Carter, are you confessing to unplugging the patient's machines and then falsifying the records to frame Nurse Rebecca? This exam clearly shows a manipulation of the time of death." Carter, realizing his mistake too late, tried to backpedal. "No, that's not what I meant. This girl is lying. She couldn't have overheard me that day. I was alone in my office." A murmur went through the room as everyone realized he had just confirmed the existence of the phone conversation Sophia had mentioned. The director of the hospital's composure finally broke completely. In a last act of desperation, he pointed at Rebecca. "She's as guilty as I am. She knew those patients were from the mob. She should have understood how things work." The entire courtroom held its breath at this involuntary confession, and the judge banged his gavel forcefully. "Officers, arrest Dr. Carter. I am ordering his immediate arrest for homicide, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice. And contact the prosecutor's office. I want a full investigation into all suspicious deaths at that hospital." While the officers approached with handcuffs, Carter finally collapsed in his chair. All his arrogance evaporated. His gaze crossed with Sophia's one last time, and for the first time it was he who looked away first, unable to face the truth in a child's eyes. Rebecca, still handcuffed but now with tears of relief streaming down her face, watched her little warrior with infinite pride. The judge, after ordering Carter's arrest, turned to Rebecca with a gentle smile. "I think we have all the evidence needed to close this case." The metallic sound of the handcuffs echoed through the courtroom, but this time it was not Rebecca's wrists being restrained. Dr. Carter, the once imposing hospital director, now visibly trembled as the officers approached him. His face, once a mask of professional superiority, was now contorted in an expression of pure terror. "Please," he began to plead, his voice unrecognizable, "you don't understand. They'll kill me in prison. The mafia has people everywhere. I need protection." His expensive lawyers had already strategically stepped away, leaving him alone to face the consequences of his actions. The judge, who moments before had ordered the director's arrest, now turned to Rebecca with an expression of deep regret. His voice, normally stern, carried a tone of sincere contrition. "Mrs. Rebecca, on behalf of the justice system, I offer you my sincerest apologies. It is with profound shame that I acknowledge how this court nearly committed an irreparable judicial error. Your daughter demonstrated a courage today that reminded us of the true meaning of justice." As he spoke, he gestured for the officer to immediately remove Rebecca's handcuffs, who still could not believe the sudden change in her situation. Carter continued his descent into despair, struggling as the officers tried to lead him out. "You can't send me to a regular prison. They have people inside. They'll eliminate me before dawn." His Italian suit, once immaculate, was now rumpled from the futile resistance, and beads of sweat ran down his face as he cast frantic glances in all directions. The fear of the mafia, which he had used for so long to control others, now turned against him like a venomous snake. "Your Honor, I can make a deal. I have names, dates, records of all the payments. I can bring down the entire organization." The judge rose to his full authority, his voice thundering through the room. "Dr. Carter, you are in no position to negotiate. In addition to aggravated homicide and attempted framing of an innocent, your own words have just confessed involvement with a criminal organization. Officer, arrange maximum isolation for the prisoner and contact the organized crime task force immediately." Carter paled even further upon hearing these words, his knees finally buckling, needing to be supported by the officers holding him. Rebecca, now free from the handcuffs she had carried for so long, massaged her wrists as she watched the scene with a mixture of relief and compassion. Even after everything Carter had done, her nurse's nature made her recognize the genuine terror in his eyes. The judge continued his orders. This court orders a complete investigation of the hospital, with special attention to all deaths occurring during Dr. Carter's tenure. Mrs. Rebecca, not only do I declare your innocence, but I recommend your immediate reinstatement to your position with all applicable compensation for the time unjustly detained. As Carter was finally removed from the courtroom, still screaming about his need for protection, the judge made one final pronouncement that silenced the court. Let this case serve as a lesson to all of us. Justice is not just about laws and procedures, it's about truth and courage. Today, a 9-year-old child taught us more about integrity and bravery than all our years of experience. Mrs. Rebecca, your daughter is a living testament to the legacy of courage that your late husband left behind. The court would like to officially record that Sophia demonstrated today the same heroism that made her father an inspiration to all. The judge's final words were almost drowned out by the sound of muffled sobs echoing through the courtroom. Rebecca remained standing, silent tears running down her face as she watched her little warrior, who still stood firm before the pulpit, so small and yet so strong at the same time. The nightmare was finally over, and in place of fear and uncertainty, a new dawn of justice began to rise. The sound of the metal handcuffs hitting the floor echoed through the courtroom like the last vestige of the nightmare that was finally ending. Rebecca remained motionless for a moment, her wrists free for the first time in weeks, feeling strange and light. Time seemed to have frozen in that instant, as if the entire universe held its breath before the moment mother and daughter had longed for. Sophia, still standing near the judge's pulpit, visibly trembled, her small hands clutching the photo of her father she carried in her pocket, her eyes fixed on her mother's figure, as if fearing she might disappear at any moment. It was Rebecca who broke the spell first, opening her arms in a silent invitation that made Sophia let out a repressed sob. The girl began to run, her little legs carrying her across the courtroom aisle as if she had wings. Tears were already flowing freely down her face as she threw herself into her mother's arms with such force that it nearly knocked them over. Rebecca enveloped her in an embrace so tight it seemed to make up for all the lost nights, all the missed goodnight kisses, all the tears she shed alone in her cell thinking of her little one. "My brave little warrior," she whispered between sobs, covering Sophia's face with kisses. "You were so strong, so brave, so much like your father." The entire courtroom watched the scene in reverent silence, many discreetly dabbing tears. The judge, known for his stern demeanor, made no effort to hide the emotion in his eyes as he watched love and justice intertwine before him. Sophia buried her face in her mother's neck, her little shoulders shaking with sobs that carried as much relief as joy. "Mommy, I was so scared. But I remembered what Daddy always said about being brave even when we're scared." "You weren't alone, Mommy. I would never leave you alone." Rebecca only tightened the embrace, unable to form words through the tears now wetting her daughter's hair. Caroline slowly approached the embrace, her own tears flowing freely down her face. Seeing her, Sophia extended an arm to include her in the hug, pulling her into that circle of love and gratitude. "Thank you for taking care of her," Rebecca whispered to her friend, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Caroline merely shook her head, also at a loss for words, enveloping mother and daughter in a protective embrace that symbolized the end of weeks of fear and uncertainty. The three remained that way, united, their hearts beating to a rhythm of joy and relief that words could not express. The moment gained an even deeper dimension when Sophia took her father's crumpled photo from her pocket. "Look, Mom," she said between sobs. "Dad was with us all along. I felt him giving me strength when I was scared." Rebecca took the photo with trembling hands, her fingers gently tracing William's smiling face in his military uniform. "Your father would be so proud of you, my love," she whispered. "So proud of our little hero." The judge, witnessing the scene, made a discreet gesture for the court officers to give the family a moment of privacy, understanding the sacredness of that reunion. Sunlight streamed through the high courthouse windows, enveloping the three women in a golden embrace that seemed to bless that moment of redemption. Sophia alternated between laughter and tears, clinging to her mother as if she never wanted to let go, while Rebecca covered her face with joyful kisses. Caroline kept a protective arm around the two, her heart overflowing with happiness to see her best friend finally free and reunited with her daughter. The love that filled that embrace was so palpable, it seemed to illuminate the entire courthouse, transforming that austere space of justice into a sanctuary of hope and redemption. News of the case's turnaround had spread rapidly, and a crowd of reporters and photographers awaited on the courthouse steps. The afternoon sun bathed the marble steps in intense gold, as if nature itself celebrated that moment of justice. Inside, Rebecca held Sophia tightly against her chest, while Caroline organized the best way to exit. The flashes were already starting to flicker through the glass doors, and the murmur of the crowd grew louder by the minute. "Keep Sophia between us," Caroline instructed, her protective instinct flaring. "Don't let them scare the girl." The moment the courthouse doors opened was an explosion of light and sound. Dozens of cameras fired simultaneously, turning the sunny afternoon into a blinding flash show. The reporters surged forward en masse, their microphones extended like spears, all shouting questions at once. "Sophia, how did you uncover the truth?" "Rebecca, how does it feel to be exonerated?" "Little one, did you know you'd be a hero?" Sophia cowered against her mother, momentarily frightened by the intensity of the attention. Rebecca, still wearing her prison uniform but now with renewed dignity, protectively enveloped her daughter in her arms as Caroline forged a path through the crowd. "Please give them space." Caroline's voice rang firm as she created a protective corridor. "They've just been through so much. Respect this moment." But it was impossible to fully contain the media frenzy over such an extraordinary story. A 9-year-old child who had defeated a criminal scheme and saved her mother with nothing but courage and truth. Photographers jostled for the best angle, capturing the moment when mother and daughter descended the courthouse steps, their silhouettes etched against the setting sun like an image of redemption. Sophia, regaining some of her courage, lifted her face from her mother's protective embrace and looked out at the crowd. A small smile began to form on her lips as she realized she was no longer met with accusatory stares, but admiration and respect. "Mom," she whispered, squeezing Rebecca's hand, "they're happy because the truth won, right?" Rebecca kissed the top of her daughter's head, tears of pride shining in her eyes. "Yes, my love, and all thanks to your bravery." One more sensitive reporter captured the intimate moment between mother and daughter, and for a few seconds, the flashes ceased, as if everyone recognized the sacredness of that instant. Caroline finally guided them to the waiting car, keeping the more persistent reporters at bay. The sunlight danced with the tears of joy still streaking their faces, creating tiny rainbows that seemed to bless each step towards freedom. As they drove away from the courthouse, Sophia looked back one last time at the imposing building where her courage had changed so many lives. A young reporter managed one final question. "Sophia, were you scared?" The girl paused for a moment, her face alight with a smile that carried all the wisdom she had inherited from her parents. "Yes, but my dad taught me that being brave isn't about not being afraid. It's doing the right thing even when you are afraid." The car pulled away under a shower of flashes, carrying the little family towards a new beginning. Rebecca hugged Sophia in the back seat while Caroline drove, occasionally dabbing at tears of joy. The sun continued its journey across the sky, painting the city in hues of hope and new beginnings. The next day's headlines would celebrate the story of the little hero who faced a corrupt system with nothing but truth and courage. But for the 3 people in that car, the greatest victory was far simpler and profound. They were together again, and now nothing could tear them apart. The hospital corridors, once gloomy and oppressive, were now decorated with flowers and welcome banners. Rebecca, wearing her crisp white uniform for the first time in weeks, walked hand in hand with Sophia towards the main auditorium. The news of her appointment as head supervisor had been only the beginning of the day's surprises. Staff members clustered in doorways and hallways, applauding as they passed, many with tears in their eyes at finally seeing justice prevail. Caroline walked just behind, a proud smile lighting up her face as she carried a small bundle that Sophia couldn't stop eyeing curiously. The auditorium was packed, but a respectful silence fell over the crowd when the doors opened. On the stage, beyond the hospital's board of directors, there was an unexpected presence that made Sophia squeeze her mother's hand tightly, a line of military officers in dress uniforms, all former comrades of her father. Their hearts nearly stopped when they recognized at the center of the stage the imposing figure of the country's president himself. Rebecca felt her legs weaken, but Sophia stood tall, her chin raised in the same way William used to do in important moments. "Today we are not only celebrating the return of an exemplary professional," the president's voice echoed through the auditorium, but also paying tribute to a courage that transcends generations. He gestured and one of the officers approached, carrying a blue velvet box. "Sophia," he continued, his voice now softer, "your father, the military nurse William, received this same medal for his act of bravery in saving his medical team. Today, his daughter has shown that courage runs in this family's veins." The officer opened the box, revealing an honor medal identical to the one Rebecca kept at home, the one she had received after William's passing. Tears streamed freely down Rebecca's face as she watched her little warrior climb the steps of the stage, her back straight and her stride firm, exactly as William had taught her. The president knelt to be at Sophia's level, a gesture that made the attending photographers frantically fire their flashes. "For your extraordinary courage in defense of truth and justice," he solemnly declared, placing the medal around Sophia's neck, "you have honored not only your father's memory, but also reminded us that courage knows no age." Sophia touched the medal with trembling fingers, her eyes shining with unshed tears. It was then that Caroline approached with the mysterious bundle, revealing a small white lab coat, customized with the name Sophia, and below it, "Truth's Heroine," embroidered in gold. The girl could no longer hold back her tears when she saw the officers, friends of her father, saluting her, just as they did for William. "Your father would be so proud," one of them whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You have the same brave heart as him." Rebecca was called to the stage to officially receive her appointment as chief supervisor, but everyone could see that her greatest pride was not the promotion, but the sight of her daughter wearing the medal that mirrored her father's. The hospital's new director, chosen after a rigorous investigation, made sure to highlight how the changes implemented by Rebecca were already transforming the work environment. "Our new chief supervisor not only survived injustice," he declared, "but emerged from it with an even stronger vision of how a hospital should truly serve its community." The most touching moment, however, came when Sophia was invited to say a few words. The girl climbed up to the podium, her small stature barely reaching the microphone, but her voice sounded clear and firm. "My father always said that being brave is not about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when we're scared. Today I know he was right, and I also know that as long as there are people willing to fight for the truth, justice will always prevail." The entire auditorium rose in an emotional ovation as Rebecca embraced her little heroine, their identical medals to William's shining side by side, a living testament that courage and justice are legacies passed down from generation to generation. The public hospital where Dr. Carter now worked was a completely different world from the luxurious environment he had commanded. The cramped corridors, always crowded with patients waiting for care, lacked the marble floors he was accustomed to. The smell of cheap disinfectant replaced imported air fresheners, and the constant noise of people and old equipment created a chaotic symphony that left him constantly tense. Every unfamiliar face that crossed his path caused a jolt. Could it be someone from the mob, coming to collect on his betrayal? Fear had become his constant companion, turning every shadow into a potential threat. His hands, once steady during the most delicate surgeries, now trembled slightly as he examined patients in the overcrowded outpatient clinic. Even imprisoned, he had a judicial agreement in which he was reducing his sentence. The agreement required him to complete 2,000 patient visits per year in public hospitals, always under police supervision and without the right to choose his patients. The white lab coat that once symbolized his power now seemed to weigh a ton, bearing not only the mark of his crimes, but also the distrustful looks of colleagues who knew his story. "Dr. Carter," called a nurse in a firm voice, "we have an emergency in pediatrics, and no, you cannot pass this case to another doctor this time." It was during the treatment of a child with severe pneumonia that something began to change within him. The girl with her 7 years and feverish eyes painfully reminded him of Sophia, the same age, the same determined look, even in illness. The child's mother, a humble woman who had waited 6 hours in line, thanked each of his gestures as if it were a divine gift. "Doctor, thank you so much for taking care of my daughter," she said with tears in her eyes. "I know you must see hundreds of people, but to us, you are an angel." Her words, laden with a genuine gratitude he had never experienced in his private clinic, hit him like a punch in the stomach. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Carter kept looking over his shoulders, startled by every door that slammed, every car that drove too slowly down the street. But between one start and another, something unexpected began to happen. The patients, with their stories of struggle and overcoming, their sincere gratitude for basic care that he had always considered trivial, began to touch a part of his soul that he thought was dead. An elderly lady who walked miles to get medical care, a father who missed work to take his sick child, a young mother who had no money to buy antibiotics. Each story was a lesson in humility that he was forced to learn. The most impactful moment came when a man was rushed in, a victim of a work accident. Carter immediately recognized the type of injury. He had treated similar cases in his private clinic, where he charged small fortunes for surgeries. Here, with limited equipment and an overwhelmed staff, he had to use all his skill and knowledge to save the patient's life. Hours later, exhausted but victorious, he realized that he had felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the true satisfaction of being a doctor, of saving a life not for money or status, but for the very essence of the oath he had taken and betrayed so many times. The fear of the mafia never completely disappeared. It was his punishment to carry this burden. Every shadow could still hide an assassin. Every stranger could be the messenger of his final sentence. But between one start and another, between one appointment and another, Carter began to find a different form of redemption. It wasn't the forgiveness he sought. He knew that some crimes are beyond forgiveness, but a way to use his last years to do something that really mattered. The patients didn't know his past, didn't know his crimes, and in their grateful eyes he found not absolution, but the chance to remember why he had chosen medicine in the first place. On a particularly busy afternoon, as he attended yet another crowded hallway of patients, Carter heard a child ask her mother why the doctor always seemed scared. "We all have our fears, daughter," the mother replied with simple wisdom, "but he keeps coming here, taking care of people, and that's what matters." Carter lowered his head, hiding the tears those words provoked. His fear of the mafia had become his personal prison, but also his chance for redemption. Each workday was another day of life, another opportunity to do something good, even if it was too late to fix all the evil he had done. Sophia walked through the hospital hallways, proudly wearing her miniature lab coat, now decorated with her Medal of Honor, on her way to her mother's new room in supervision. The hospital had changed a lot in recent months. The walls had been painted in brighter colors, framed messages of hope decorated the hallways, and the heavy atmosphere of before had given way to an air of healing and compassion. The girl paused for a moment as she passed the public service ward, her eyes widening as she recognized a familiar figure. Dr. Carter was there, tending to patients with a gentleness she had never imagined possible from him, his once trembling hands now moving carefully as he examined a small child. The former director looked up for a moment, meeting Sophia's gaze. There was no more arrogance in his posture, nor the cold glint that had once characterized his gaze. In its place there was something new, a mixture of shame, regret, and surprisingly, gratitude. Sophia watched as he bowed his head in a respectful gesture, before turning his attention back to the young patient, his gentle words echoing down the hallway. "Now, young one, let's figure out how to make you feel better, shall we?" The girl felt something warm in her chest as she realized that her courage had not only freed her mother, it had also, in some mysterious way, freed Carter from his own prison of arrogance and cruelty. Upon reaching Rebecca's office, Sophia found her mother finishing up the last wall decoration. The exam that had changed their lives was now framed in an elegant frame, hung next to the photograph of William in his military uniform. The two proofs of courage, her father's heroism and her daughter's bravery, now guarded the room like silent sentinels, reminding all who entered that truth and justice always find their way. Rebecca hugged her daughter tightly, both of them gazing at the frames on the wall. "You know, dear," Rebecca whispered, "your father always used to say that a single courageous action can change many lives. Look how much your courage has transformed this hospital." Sophia rested her head on her mother's shoulder, her fingers playing with the medal on her chest that mirrored her father's in the photograph. The hospital around them buzzed with activity, hurried nurses, doctors on their rounds, patients being cared for. But now there was something different in the air, an energy of hope and humanity that seemed to permeate every corner. Carolyn passed through the door, bringing another framed article to decorate the room, a framed report about the little heroine who had unmasked a criminal scheme and transformed an entire hospital. "Look at that," Caroline joked. "Our little warrior is now a living legend." The three of them laughed together, but there was emotion in their eyes as they remembered the journey that had brought them here. Through the office window, they could see Dr. Carter crossing the courtyard towards the public ward, his back no longer bent by the constant fear of the mafia, but by the weight of his own transformations. Sophia watched him for a moment before turning to her mother. "Mommy, wouldn't Daddy be happy to see that even the people who hurt us can change?" Rebecca kissed the top of her daughter's head, marveling at the wisdom hidden behind those young eyes. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, making the medals of honor, William's in the photograph, Sophia's on her chest, shine like twin stars. The framed report silently told their story of courage and truth, while William's photograph smiled at them, his proud gaze seeming more alive than ever. Rebecca embraced her little heroine once more, their hearts beating to the same rhythm of love and gratitude. In their minds, they could almost hear William's voice repeating the words that were now the motto of their lives. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the certainty that there are things more important than it. And in that room at that moment, 3 generations of courage met. The hero in the photograph, the nurse who never gave up, and the little girl who had proven that bravery knows no age. Did you like the story of Rebecca and Sophia? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and check out the next one that's waiting for you here on the screen. I'll see you there.